Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 15, Monday Night Football edition, and what an interesting game we have on tap. More on that game a little bit later in the program. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, I guess the best way I can describe what we saw for most of Week 15 was uneven performances from some of the elite sides and from some of the bottom feeders in the league.
So you're saying it's the 2023 football season?
Perfect encapsulation, just in a 16-game sample size in terms of teams that should go out there and put forth a much better effort, and teams that completely no-showed getting their head coach fired on Thursday in the Los Angeles Chargers.
Oof, that was tough to watch. I mean, you watch a team go out there and just have zero care for its head coach.
I think that's less than zero, honestly.
Yeah. I am fully on board with Richard Sherman's. We should have fired him at halftime. I think Brandon Staley probably should have been gone a couple weeks ago, honestly. That was a sinking ship that you could see was eventually going to go the way of the Titanic.
Yeah, it was not a good state of affairs. We hadn't seen a performance that bad since Nathaniel Hackett got let go against the Los Angeles Rams during the holiday season last year, and we'll see exactly what we get out of the Chargers going forward. But just to lay things out for a lot of you, our loyal listeners, Monday's all about the good, the bad, and the ugly. We recap what we've seen so far, talk a little Monday Night Football, some injury updates as well from the good doc Deepak Shona, and some look-ahead lines. But Payne, we may as well start with the game that we saw most recently, and that was Sunday Night Football, where the Ravens took a lot of money from both recreational and professional bettors. That number closed, 4 juiced, even 4.5 at some recreational shops. The total had been plummeting all day amid speculation there was weather. The weather never arrived, but Trevor Lawrence in the red zone did, and Doug Peterson took the opportunity to describe it as a learning experience for his football team.
I've had a couple Sunday nighters where we've kind of liked the public side and haven't quite got there, but I continue to have the question of, like, how is the other team going to score? And that was really my vibe last night with Jacksonville. I didn't expect them to do much offensively. It was good getting Agnew back into the fold to kind of fill that slot role that was, void of some talent there once Kirk went down, and we saw the explosive to Agnew. So positive there. But this just continues to look clunky on offense for Jacksonville, and came into the season thinking, hey, the way the Jaguars offense trended down the stretch of 2022, this is going to be an offense that just hits the ground running to start the season, and then all of a sudden you start looking at the offensive line issues with guys moving on, Robinson getting suspended, some injuries. So you could start to make some excuses early on for why it wasn't looking great. But ultimately, this is a Trevor Lawrence thing. And we've seen this the last handful of years. As soon as they start to sniff the green zone, as soon as you start to get into the red zone, just costly turnovers, ridiculous decision-making. The fumble.
Guy wasn't touched.
Just running.
He wasn't touched.
No. And then all of a sudden, before the half, you get the explosive. You have a chance to work your way back into this game. And what is it? 1st and goal from the 5-7 seconds to go. 8-year-olds playing peewee know you can't throw it 3 yards short of the goal line in that situation. And all of a sudden, and I hate to be a dick, but listen, you see him take off his helmet. He starts trotting to the locker room with the locks flowing, and it's like, boy, this is the dumb blonde situation. This is a dumb blonde moment. Stereotypical, right? It's just the stereotyping you don't want to do, but that's the first thought that goes through my mind. It's inconceivable that you throw 3 yards short of the goal line with no timeouts, with 7 seconds to go. I don't know how that happens. And we've seen this throughout the last couple of seasons. I mean, think about some of those Texans games that you lost where you're just throwing interceptions in the end zone. You go back to the Pittsburgh game, and I understand there was a torrential downpour, but you got to know the situation. I mean, how many times does this guy throw a pick inside the green zone, inside the red zone on first fucking down? It happens all the time.
Yeah, it's a sorry state of affairs. And if you're Jacksonville, I have to imagine the front office is going, wait, we have to decide if we want to give this guy elite quarterback money sometime soon. And while the talent on paper looks to be everything you'd hope for and then some, the decision-making and on-field performance in clutch situations leaves an awful lot to be desired. And to your point,
you have to. What else are you going to do?
I don't know what the answer is, unfortunately.
I mean, Houston has their quarterback. Shane Steichen is doing some great things with backups in an injury-riddled team in a horrific secondary. You're not losing enough games to where you're going to have a high draft pick. So,
Kirk Cousins, let's go get him. Get him in free agency.
Is that what you do? You don't pay Trevor.
I think you have
kind
to.
of pay up for a 2-year Kirk Cousins, but the problem is you're still going to be semi-decent there, so you're not moving up and getting an early draft pick either.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things that why Trent Baalke and company make the big bucks. It's not a decision I'd want to make because I know everything that people have said about Trevor Lawrence. You see flashes, but the on-field performance doesn't quite suggest giving him that generational wealth to be the face of your franchise going forward. But
think about it. He's got an arm cannon.
Oh, there's no doubt.
He's mobile. He's tough as nails.
He's got everything going for him.
It's like everything you want. This would be a tougher decision than what the Giants were just faced with in Daniel Jones,
or the Bears
by far,
with Justin Fields.
Yeah, that's not difficult.
I mean, before we move on to the rest of the good, the bad, and the ugly, what do we make of the Ravens? I know what the scoreboard said there, but you watch that football game, and for a team that has the inside track to be the number 1 seed in the AFC, a lot of people talking about it, the second best team in football. Payne, every time I watch them, I come away unimpressed, especially on the road. I know dominating the Lions and Seahawks, when we had them in those games, you go, okay, this is what the team is capable of. Then you watch them on the road and you go, this team feels like they're missing something.
Yeah. It's a little clunky on offense. It still is. The throw game is a little weird. And I know they've gotten to this drop back throw game where Lamar initially wasn't taking off as much. Now he's starting to run a little bit more. And that was a good thing he actually implemented his legs yesterday, because the offense would have really been clunky had that not been the case. I mean, they weren't really getting the receivers involved very much. Keaton Mitchell loss is massive. I mean, poor kid, but you're down Mark Andrews. You don't have a ton of explosiveness. That was kind of your explosive guy there in Keaton Mitchell. So that is a tough loss to shoulder there. But it doesn't quite look right defensively. If you just look in totality, it's a very good defense. But you're kind of seeing some leaks one week, right? They can't stop the run one week. The secondary's getting burnt. Humphrey last week. I mean, that's supposed to be your shutdown corner. Just got twisted inside and out on the final drive by Matthew Stafford and the Rams. So it's like he's not playing to that level. There's some weirdness here. And I can say, you look across the board with all of the AFC teams, and in totality, the AFC is far better than the NFC, something that we've kind of pounded the table for. But if you look at like the cream of the crop, I mean, San Francisco has clearly distinguished themselves as the best team in football. And we've seen some sharp bettors really react in the last 2 weeks, getting ahead of the market there and taking the NFC to win the Super Bowl at minus $1.20 or better. And it's because even though the NFC is way down, you have a couple teams that are just playing a little bit better than the rest of the AFC teams, right? Question mark still, even after yesterday's win with Buffalo, and Miami's beat up, and the Chiefs haven't looked great. And, again, to circle back to the main conversation here, the Ravens offense has been a little bit clunky.
Don't tell that to Bills fans and everybody is part of Bills Mafia, because that hype train has officially left the station, and you are going to have to endure it for the next 3 weeks as the Bills have 2 very winnable and straightforward games on paper as double-digit favorites against the Chargers and the Patriots before their regular season finale in your neck of the woods against the Dolphins. Good performances that you saw, whether they be of the team or individual variety, that you'd like to highlight.
Unfortunately for us, I think you have to focus in a little bit on Baker Mayfield. He's not the most talented guy, but boy, he is.
Dude's a gamer.
He is a gamer, and I thought he was fantastic. Now, I know he ran up against a Packers secondary that's missing 4 of its top 5 guys from the beginning of the season, and it was a short week with some travel. But Mayfield had a perfect passer rating. Every time he dropped back to pass, he averaged nearly 0.8 expected points. Green Bay allowed 85% of pass attempts to be caught. It didn't matter what the Packers did on early downs. Tampa was fantastic on late down, 67% success rate. Chris Godwin off the milk carton averaged 5.2 yards per route run in the game. And then all of a sudden, you start to look at this. The defensive injuries have piled up. Now starting to get a touch healthier. We saw Levante David back. Vita Vea was back.
Devin White, a healthy scratch, by the way, was interesting.
Back. Yeah, I mean, that doesn't matter.
I mean, you called that out years ago, though, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are finally starting to realize.
He's fighting for a contract, right? I mean, I don't understand the thought process there for Devin White. Our team's in first place. We're going to be in the playoffs. We're going to sit out the most important games to think that organization's going to reward us with a contract. I mean, what's the thought process there? You look at this, and I jokingly said, I don't know if this is a positive, but you make the playoffs, and somehow you maybe sneak a win in there. And you're bringing Todd Bowles back, unfortunately, I would think. I mean, I don't know. But listen.
Guys getting a team to play.
Baker Mayfield. Yeah. I mean, Baker Mayfield has exceeded every single expectation. And then you parlay that with the fact that Atlanta is continuing to screw the pooch with self-inflicted wounds because of incompetent coaching from trust fund baby Arthur Smith, where something I said to you off the air, the Falcons' last 4 losses of the season have all come on game-winning drives surrendered with 31 seconds or less. Tampa is now in prime position to win the NFC South and make the playoffs, and
host the playoffs.
Just wild to see. Yeah,
massive.
That's what it looks like.
Massive favorites to make the postseason, and slight favorites to now win the division. In terms of other good,
that put them over their win total too this week.
Yep,
right?
It did.
7-7, so they went over 6.5.
Yep, they're officially in the catbird seat there, so you can cash those tickets, assuming they play their full complement of games. It's 17 of them. Jake Browning on Saturday, Payne looked like a deer in headlights against Brian Flores' defense for long stretches of the game against the Minnesota Vikings, but leads the Bengals on an improbable drive late in that contest. Takes the Bengals down the field on 3 fourth-quarter touchdown drives, directed the game-winning drive in overtime, threw for 184 yards and 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter in overtime alone. I didn't love Jake Browning, but emotion gets the best of us sometime, talking about the Vikings, how they shouldn't have cut him or whatever the hell he said to the camera. But Jake Browning has stabilized the position, and for a Bengals team whose season looked like it was going to careen off the highway, suddenly they're very much in control of their own destiny in the AFC, and a playoff bid seems like a realistic possibility in the Queen City.
You thought Minnesota was going to run away with that game at 17-3?
Should have.
Yeah. One of the games we didn't discuss, but we just kind of ran through it and said, hey, anything above 3, look to Minnesota. That was the sharp side. And Browning, to your point, was not very good in the first half. Exceptional in the second half. And really the one part of his game that was fantastic and you knew would be tested was under pressure. I mean, Brian Flores, it's what he's doing this year. He's sending heat. He's playing zone behind it. Browning was going to see a ton of pressure looks. You know what you were getting. And Flores sent the blitz 54% of dropbacks, and Browning was shockingly better when blitzed, better when pressured on Saturday than when he was kept clean. 2 of the biggest throws of the entire game came when Browning was pressured. You look across the board, 80% adjusted accuracy, 0 turnover-worthy plays when under pressure. Overall, this is starting to get interesting. We saw Browning get kind of thrown into the fire there on, I believe it was a Thursday night game against the Ravens. Did not look the part. Struggled against Pittsburgh. But you start putting all of these performances together, And among 43 quarterbacks this season to have at least 100 dropbacks, Browning is graded out 14th. So he's been more than a serviceable replacement to Joe Burrow. I understand Joe Burrow was injured, so I'm not trying to throw some hot takes out there.
Here we come.
But Burrow was 16th. He's graded out 16th. So Browning is actually in totality played better slightly than Burrow. But again, the way Burrow was trending, we know the upsides there. I'm not calling for that, but it was interesting to see that when you incorporate all of Burrow's games in this season. Obviously, we are not doing that, and we didn't do that internally. We're throwing the first few weeks out the window, but that's kind of how Browning's playing right now. He's at least giving them a fighting chance. Let's see if Jamar Chase is healthy this upcoming week.
Other positives that you saw that you felt were worth mentioning in the wake of Week 15.
I think, the Lions getting back on track, that was something that we had certainly outlined for our listeners. And as you sit there and watch it, the first 3 drives, I was like, here we fucking go. And this offense is just...
I may or may not have gotten a text message or two about Jared Goff's capabilities as an NFL quarterback.
It was just unbelievable to watch. But then all of a sudden, Detroit ends the game scoring touchdowns on 6 of its final 7 drives. Goff looked comfortable. Didn't look that way early on, but we thought he would heading into that game just because of, the surroundings and the environment. He was back home, starting centers back, the dome environment. He was going to have some assistance from the ground game, which would open up play action on early downs, where a lot of the explosives come from that Lions offense. And then all of a sudden you get Gibbs and Montgomery with that nice 1-2 punch. Both were explosive, both were efficient. And then the ability for Goff to get to his security blanket in Laporta is something we outlined specifically last Thursday with how poor Denver is defending tight ends. You'd be really hard-pressed to find a matchup in the league with 2 teams that went into the game in roughly the same ballpark power rating-wise that would have such a great matchup advantage. And that's kind of what we were identifying there with the Lions' investment. And, price is always vital and important and the first thing you look at, but matchups absolutely matter in this league.
All right, let's go from the good to the bad, and I'll start with a team near and dear in this household, not to me, but to my significant other, with the Pittsburgh Steelers, who I thought with extended rest might put together a little bit more dynamic offensive performance. But Payne, it does feel like it's time to eulogize the Maserati. I think Mitchell Trubisky as an NFL quarterback, unless he's going to go back to the drawing board and rework his mechanics, may no longer be a thing. Mike Tomlin, in the wake of that disappointing performance from the Steelers, his quote, "Let's be honest, we're a fundamentally poor football team right now. We're playing losing football, and I own that. I don't necessarily have the answers today. If I did, we'd have played differently today, but I will acknowledge things will not continue the way that they are." The Steelers have now lost 4 out of 5, including 2 games as more than 4-point favorites in a virtual pick'em over the weekend against the Colts. Trubisky gets benched late in that contest in favor of Mason Rudolph. You look at the defense, allowed 5.7 yards per play, absolutely shredded in the second half, gave up a 15-play, 70-yard march. The Colts ran it, felt like 37 times in a row to try and put that game away. Minkah Fitzpatrick leaves with injury, and a Steelers team who had been dancing between the raindrops, who we had called for their regression early in the season. Regression has exacted its measure of revenge, and this Steelers team has come crashing back to earth over the last couple weeks.
Got Stones to play him this week?
I mean, it's going to be the side. I mean, especially as we monitor that Chase injury report, the fact we're out to a juice 3 at a very prominent shop. I mean, you're going to get a Steelers max effort. Now, I'm not sure if I'm going to get to the window just yet, but I sure as shit ain't laying points with the Bengals on the road.
There's only so long you can win gritty and do the little things, right? Eventually, the plays within every single game matter. And when you zoom out and look at the most basic things, the calling card of the Steelers was a tough physical defense. That defense is just slightly better than average now, and it's downtrending, and it's dealt with injuries. You mentioned Minkah Fitzpatrick. And we've said, hey, this is a team that, at least the defense, that is dramatic with their splits when they get pressure versus not getting pressure. But once Cam Hayward returned, you're like, okay, the run defense got a little bit better. But you outlined that drive where they just got bullied. And then you think about, the overarching point here is that even though scoring is down, in the NFL this season. Offense is still more predictive to future success than defense. And the Steelers' offense, 26th in non-garbage time EPA per play. Doesn't matter who the offensive coordinator is, who's calling the plays, who's under center. And so in the year 2023, when you have a fringe bottom 5 offense and an average-ish defense, this is the result. Mitchell Trubisky specifically, the mechanics are really poor. The guy's throwing a fadeaway on virtually every single pass. And it's very clear now, even as deficient as Kenny Pickett is in a lot of areas, he's certainly an upgrade. Is he going to be out there? Is it Pickett or Rudolph? I get that's kind of the vibe I'm getting.
I don't think it's going to be Trubisky. I definitely don't think it'll be Trubisky with them pulling the ripcord there, now having a full week to get Mason acclimated. I mean, he's been in that system for a long time. Pickett will be the one to watch. He becomes the interesting wrinkle here if the Steelers believe that he's healthy enough to go. I'm not a huge Kenny Pickett guy, but what I've seen over the last couple weeks, he at least gives them more of a chance to move that offense.
He at least steps into a throw.
Yeah, not everything's not bailing off his back foot. When you have a wide open receiver with about an 8-yard radius in the middle of the field, Trubisky's got no pressure and he's throwing off the back foot. Mechanically, it's an issue. And you see flashes. When he had chances to step into the throw, guy's got zip, throws a completion to Deontay Johnson on 3rd and long. It's got to be one of the more head-scratching situations unfolding with a quarterback that has the physical tools but clearly doesn't have the mental wherewithal to be able to deliver.
And that was a weird game because there was a little bit of a battle back and forth. There was obviously the game open, Colts -2.5. And it even swung at one of the sharper shops on game day once both defensive ends got upgraded for Pittsburgh. There was some -1 Pittsburgh. But eventually, as that game closed, there's a couple of the sharper shops that went back to Colts -2. And then all of a sudden, Pittsburgh's up 13-0, and you're like, this is the Colts team that we didn't think was very good. This is the Gardner Minshew that, is a fine backup, but we had started to see glimpses of in recent weeks as to why he's a backup, right? Horrific against Cincinnati, struggled for large stretches against the Titans, wasn't great against the Buccaneers defense that was down, I believe, 5 starters in that game. But that was a pretty disappointing effort there, the final 3 quarters from Pittsburgh, especially after you've started to drop some games, after your confidence is a little rattled, getting out 13-0, right? You're like, okay.
You get the big special teams play.
Yeah. It's like just outscored 30-0 the rest of the way.
What other negatives did you see from over the weekend? There are a myriad of choices, so the world is truly your oyster in this particular department.
Yeah, I know some of the games or the teams or the players that we've listed, but we've kind of gone over them a little bit in passing, right? The Jaguars' offense was a little bit clunky. The Chargers' effort on Thursday night, just quitting on Brandon Staley. The Cowboys...
Bad spot. I don't know what to really truly make of it, but you didn't figure they'd go out there and lay that kind of egg, I guess.
So I know on Thursday, and I just, for full transparency, we were the price on the game of like Buffalo -2.5 was the right price. And I know that'll sound crazy as you've already watched the game unfold in front of your eyes, but it was the right price. Now, it was a great spot for Buffalo. We were just a little concerned at the approach Buffalo would have offensively. Little concerned about a couple other areas of that game that we outlined, right? We didn't really see that great effort from Buffalo, that dominating effort against Kansas City, right? They came out hot, but the final 2.5 quarters, final 40 minutes just weren't very good. We ended up getting to the window on Buffalo because of what transpired with some of the health situations for Dallas. There were some rumors going around that about 15 guys caught the flu. It was going through the locker room. A couple key cogs were in that mix, and you saw a very lethargic effort from Dallas. Now, is it just a one-game situation where it was a fantastic spot for Buffalo, their season on the line, and then all of a sudden, you had a Dallas team coming off a Super Bowl-like win against the Eagles, and Jerry Jones had even come out before the game and said, that was the biggest win of the McCarthy era, and now you're going on the road into weather, and again, 15 guys have the flu, and so, you got a lethargic effort from Dallas there, and, it's kind of one of those old-school December wins with a running game and defense, and kind of pounded the table there. If you are going to go to this run-heavy approach for Buffalo, like it's got to be James Cook, right? And we saw the run-heavy approach, and Hankins was down, and the Cowboys looked pretty lethargic, and Cook went out there and had 8.2 yards per touch, 2 touchdowns. And so that's kind of we're not throwing in the towel on Dallas. They certainly have some deficiencies. And I still don't think it's a Super Bowl caliber team. But I would say the effort there was a little shoddy. I would also say the head scratching part of the Dallas loss was the final 10 minutes.
Why are the starters out there?
The game's over. It's 31-3. You clearly don't have any juice. You know a large percentage of your team's dealing with the flu. What do you think is going to happen in a weather environment? You think the offense is going to hang 28 points there? Meanwhile, everyone in the world knows pass is coming, right? And we just got these defensive linemen for the Bills just teeing off on guys like Zach and CeeDee Lamb's catch. Like, what's the thought process there? Like, let's not turn one bad game into a season-ending type of situation here. What was that?
I mean, look, when you're down 31-3 and you have a chance to run the football with your top wide receiver, Payne, you have to take advantage of that and make sure that CeeDee Lamb gets his one carry for the day that ends up in a touchdown. So, yes.
It's like CeeDee Lamb even knew. A couple of those short catches, he's catching just dropping to the ground. He's like,
there's no reason to take a hit there. I mean, they're laying the lumber. Just get down. Get down, live to fight another day. The Cowboys, a data point that probably won't have much meaning. You'll expect them to bounce back and at least play with a sense of purpose this weekend against the Miami Dolphins, second straight road game against an AFC East opponent. Like you said, we touched on the Jaguars. We touched on that. I'm not sure I want to beat a dead horse, but the Tennessee Titans, you're up 13-0 against a journeyman quarterback in Case Keenum. Keenum goes out there and does what he wants, when he wants, and has one weapon at his disposal in Noah Brown. No disrespect to Devin Singletary, who had a prolific day running the football, but not the kind of thing that can happen for the Tennessee Titans. And to add insult to injury, Will Levis gets rolled up. We'll monitor his status and see if he's able to return. Didn't look great with the knee, but he was able to get off the field under his own power. Could be privy to the Ryan Tannehill experience this coming Sunday against the Seattle Seahawks, but a game the Titans need to go out there and win against an upstart Texans team, creating a logjam now atop the AFC South Division with a trio of teams all at 8-6.
How dumb would that be if it's Ryan Tannehill?
Well, if Levis can't go, then Tannehill has to be out there. Or no, you're right. I'm not even thinking about it. You should be playing Malik.
I mean, listen, the Titans to me are in a slightly worse spot, it feels like, than Pittsburgh, but it's very much the same vibe. Is that you have like this defensive-minded coach in Vrabel that wants to play gritty and tough and physical. And it's like they're a mirror image of each other. It's the Spider-Man gif of the two guys pointing at each other. This Titans team, and I don't know how I got conned into this, but we kind of took a flyer future because, hey, we had two starting, rookie quarterbacks in the South Division, and we're kind of thinking of some regression for Jacksonville. It's like, okay, let's take 4.5 to 1 in a long shot division, and you knew they had to start hot or it would kind of come crumbling down. But this team doesn't have an identity. I mean, like what from the very top, like what were you doing? You're going to move on from Tannehill, but he was too expensive. No one bit. You didn't want to trade Derrick Henry away because the ownership group has a attachment to him. And so at that point, I think you looked around and be like, okay, now let's go sign 97-year-old DeAndre Hopkins, even though we don't have a chance to actually win a Super Bowl. There's just nothing there. It's just like a disconnect. And you're right. My feeling is Vrabel, even though the Titans are officially eliminated, is going to be dumb enough to trot out Ryan Tannehill. Like at this point, go lose some fucking games and improve your draft stock. Like what are you doing if you're trotting out Ryan Tannehill? You know he's not part of the future. He's gone.
Hey, I mean, credit to the handicap, by the way, taking a long shot in that division. You just chose the wrong team in the Tennessee Titans. I mean, we knew it was a division that there was going to be extremely volatile. The young teams have matured a little bit faster, but I think what you said there is probably the key point. It's not what Titan fans want to hear. You'd rather be really good and know that you had a higher ceiling, or you'd rather bottom out and figure out, okay, how do we have to rebuild this instead of being stuck in NFL purgatory, which is what this team is doing all the way down to the quarterback, because you look at Will Levis's underlying underlying numbers, nothing there suggests that he may be the heir apparent. He's going to get the chance to earn the job next year and be the quarterback of the future, but it leaves you scratching your head going, all right, if you're the Titans and you go into the 2025 draft, are you looking to draft a quarterback if you have a top 10 overall pick?
Even on defense, some of the guys that they've signed or re-signed to big money, like you're letting Tart walk. Like Vrabel's supposed to be a defensive guy. When's the last time the secondary's actually been good in a pass first league?
Hasn't been one. So
that team is, weird team, weird franchise. They need to figure out a direction and all kind of get in line and pull the same way.
Tough all around, from the good, the bad, to the ugly, and we'll highlight a couple things. I know we've touched on them. We mentioned the Chargers' overall lack of effort and focus on Thursday Night Football. Keaton Mitchell tearing up his knee, losing the biggest playmaker that had emerged for the Baltimore Ravens, especially in the ground game. The Jets' offensive line continues to be an absolute dumpster fire, and Zach Wilson, you can understand why. He was reluctant to regain that starting job, and now being a little nicked up, don't know if he's going to want to run out there and finish out the season behind that group. And the Cincinnati Bengals, while we talked about Jake Browning, the defense quietly getting nicked up as well. DJ Reader lost for the season, a key run stopper along that defensive line. DJ Ivey out with a torn knee, and we'll monitor the status of Jamar Chase. So that probably wraps it up for the ugly. Want to stay in a somewhat positive state of mind here on a Monday. So you can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. You can follow me there.
There was one ugly that we should have mentioned.
All right, well, this is the opportunity for you to put a bow on it.
I'll just mention it, and I'll let you go.
I'm afraid.
Sam Howell, what are you doing there?
I don't know. I mean, the fact that Jacoby Brissett comes out there and absolutely shreds the final two drives. Good credit to Ron Rivera, though. If you're not going to go for 2 down 14, you may as well miss the extra point so the game can fall 8. But yeah, I mean, Jacoby comes out there and gives them a puncher's chance. But I mean, Sam Howell thought that he was going to be the quarterback of the future there. But when you're pulling him in that kind of situation, maybe he needed a little bit of a reset. I can't imagine, Payne, that he's not starting next week against the Jets, but in this day and age, maybe...
Isn't that what Ron Rivera said? He came out and said he's our quarterback for the rest of the year, and Sam Howell. He just needed a little break. He was getting,
I hadn't read that comment this morning, so...
Yeah. But I think people thought they had their franchise quarterback, at least in the short term, 4 weeks ago. And now all of a sudden, that offense is looking a little shaky.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bad football team that you wonder about the direction of what's going on there. Ron Rivera won't be the head coach to see them into the future. The Harris Group and company will make a change there. It's just a question of what direction they elect to go in and how committed they stay to Sam Howell, knowing that they didn't use, a very high-end pick to try and peg him there. You can open up that quarterback battle, and maybe you do try and figure out exactly what you have between him. I don't think Jacoby Brissett fits into long-term plans, but if there's somebody else that provides a unique talent this offseason as a free agent, should be interesting to see. So you can follow me on social media, and most importantly, though, you can follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, we can run through these pretty quick with some of the look-ahead line adjustments, a lot of them injury-driven as much as anything else. We mentioned the Bengals' trip to the Steel City to take on the Steelers on Saturday. The Bengals were a pick against the Steelers last week. We see disparate results from those two teams, and the Bengals are now out to a 2.5-point favorite across the board. There are a couple of threes as well, albeit heavily juiced.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see if there's a bite at 3. Certainly we'll have to monitor the Jamar Chase situation. No, he left the game early, shoulder injury. We'll see what transpires with that. I would think, though, at 3, you would see some Steelers money. If you missed the 3, I would think that professional bettors will be throwing some Steelers and some teasers just based upon some of that movement.
Second time they'll get a look at Jake Browning as well.
Feels like a last-ditch effort for the Steelers, right? This is typically the spot when you've completely counted the Steelers out.
And they pull you back into the deep end of the pool with a miserable performance that somehow finds a way to get a W, 9-7 or some ridiculous scoreline. that'll be out there. But you mentioned Jamar Chase, big injury to follow, and you're going to want to pay attention to the quarterback situation for the Pittsburgh Steelers as well. No surprise here, Payne. The Bills get that dominant performance against the Dallas Cowboys. We're 9.5-point favorites for the trip out to the West Coast against the Los Angeles Chargers. That number climbed as high as 14 this morning. Those 14s didn't last, and we're sitting at a 13.5 painted across the board for a Saturday night showdown between the Bills and Chargers.
Yeah. I think you said everything there. Easton Stick did not show well. Got blown out. Primetime, national setting. Big game at 4 o'clock. Bills blow out Dallas. And so here we are. I would have thought people would wait.
No, nobody waits these days. Nobody waits. You got to have an itchy trigger finger in this racket.
But I understand, right? The value of 14 is substantial relative to 13.5. So you want to get that number. I don't know if I can do it, but it's certainly some inflation there on the Bills. And so I think the Chargers will end up being, well, already seeing, right, the professional side. I don't know, we think about holiday week, something we talked about Thanksgiving week. Is there enough professional support to keep this below the 14 come, Saturday night at 7:50 p.m.? I don't know.
This game is only streaming on Peacock, so it may have less of a demand there in terms of folks that can actually watch.
Is that really a thing?
Yeah, I think both games on Saturday are exclusively on Peacock.
Oh my goodness, Jesus criminy!
So I think that may.
What is this world coming to?
That may be the case there. We can take those opinions off the air, though may not be best discussed on this particular forum. Falcons Colts on.
Love Peacock. Love Peacock.
Falcons and Colts on Sunday. You haven't seen.
When I say that, you're supposed to make a noise there, Todd. Oh, I don't even know what a noise a peacock makes.
I'm not even sure. I'm not very good with making animal sounds. I'll have to look some up on my phone to figure out how to be able to pull that off. The Falcons-Colts game jumps to 0. Falcons were a 1-point favorite. We now see the Colts as a 2.5 point chalk for their trip to take on the Falcons, who are in desperation mode in their own right.
I think you said it. If that gets to 3, there will be some support for the trust fund, baby.
It may not even get to 3 before there's support for the trust fund.
If it does not get to 3, the Falcons will certainly be used by professional bettors in some teasers. As I kind of intimated, the Colts, the secondary is shoddy. You're getting Ritter back at home where he's a little bit more comfortable in that environment. We've seen that rapport with Drake London prior to the torrential downpour and some wind last week, where they were starting to get on the same page, especially in some of these home games. The Colts secondary is a little bit shaky. Gardner Minshew, I understand he looked fantastic the last 3 quarters without Minka there and a supportive ground game, but he had started a downtrend a little bit. The problem here is the coaching edge is the size of the ocean. So, in a game that's close to a pick'em, that you eventually know the Falcons play a bunch of close games and will likely soil themselves at some point in said close game. For me, it'd be Atlanta in a teaser, but that's probably it for me on this game.
One last game worth mentioning here. We've seen the market move in favor of the Bears. The Bears have been a buy-on team from professional bettors. It boiled down to getting the best of the number against the Cleveland Browns, a game that ended 20-17. Darnell Mooney can't catch passes that are thrown to him. He couldn't catch the Hail Mary that fell right into his lap to try and get the Bears the win. But you've still seen the Bears move from a field goal favorite as they'll play host to the Arizona Cardinals, now out to 4.5. I think you and I have similar thought processes when it comes to teams that have typically been underdogs, now being expected to win by margin. It's always a little bit of a delicate proposition.
Poor Justin Fields just caught a stray there. Not only could Mooney not catch it, he kicks the thing into the air, and now Fields has an interception on the stat sheet as well.
I wasn't sure where the Browns defender was going to go, by the way, with that. Like, what are you even doing there running it out of the end zone? Just fall down.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Now, Justin Fields really, you kind of think about how that game transpired. The Browns defense at home was fantastic. You had the 2 costly turnovers from Flacco early, obviously rebounded well, took his team down the field, won the game for them. But there wasn't much Bears offense, right? You had the interception that got taken down to the 1-yard line. Then you had the pick 6. And so all of a sudden, like at 17-7, the Bears are leading, and they were the sharp side at 3.5. We also said the sharp side on the Browns at 2.5. No shock game.
Funny how that happens.
3. Game lands 3. But when you look at this, I think your overarching point is, you have a Bears team that, kind of found a way to win in Minnesota, even though they tried to give it away late, specifically Fields with those fumbles. But now you're asking a team that is struggling to win these types of games to win by margin. It would be the least shocking thing in the world, though, for Arizona to take money here at 4.5. I got to tell you, though.
Oh, no.
If this got to 3, which is where the look ahead was,
you're laying it with the Bears, 100%.
I kind of think so.
Yeah.
I mean, they should be able to run the ball here on this Cardinals defense.
Yeah, you could have some weather in the mix as well. You have one team that's significantly more buttoned up defensively. You do wonder if the air has been taken out of the balloon for the Bears. I mean, Cole Kmet had said this team could run the table and what you'll get here. But it feels like Matt Eberflus still very much coaching for his job. Justin Fields trying to put some good visuals and metrics on tape, and this is the kind of defense that he can feast on compared to what the Bears have faced over the last couple weeks, Lions notwithstanding.
Yeah, that's kind of my vibe there. Is like, I understand what Cole Kmet was saying, trying to put a ray of sunshine up everyone's ass in Chicago that they could run the table here. I didn't see that happening, but the overarching point is you got a GM, you got a head coach, you got coordinators, you got a starting quarterback that are all playing for a job. And, I understand the thought process is like everyone's playing for a job every single week, but it's not human nature, right? Sometimes that dial is not cranked up to 100. And I'm not saying it would be here for Chicago, and I'm certainly not advocating laying 4.5. But if this got down to 3, I could only look the Bears at that price, and I wonder if we have that opportunity, because I kind of do envision some Cardinals money coming into the market, unless the Kyler groin injury ends up being something more than just a shot to the marbles.
No, numbers are a big part of everything that we do around these parts, but so are injuries. We highlighted a couple that we noticed throughout the week that was, but Deepak Shona provides a little bit of a deep dive in terms of when some of your favorite players from a betting and fantasy perspective could be back out there on the football field. You, of course, can follow Deepak on Twitter at SportMDAnalysis as he rolls out the red carpet for the ambulances carting players away from the field.
Are you injured or are you hurt?
When injuries occur in the NFL, you need someone to call on.
If you're hurt, you can still play. If you're injured, you can't.
Let's check in with Dr. Deepak Chona, Stanford and Harvard-trained orthopedic sports surgeon and founder of Sports Med Analytics, the industry leader in data-driven injury analysis.
So are you hurt or are you injured?
All right, let's do it. Starting with Monday Night Football and Jalen Hurts. So he was, of course, downgraded to questionable just yesterday. That trajectory does not bode well in general, but what works in Hurts' favor is one, that the illness designation is most commonly played through, and usually we don't see much of a performance hit when players do play through this. And secondly, that Hurts profiles as a relatively durable player, meaning that he tends to play through minor injuries and even through the questionable tag more often than league average. So with those two facts in mind, we would lean towards Jalen Hurts being out there, but this one will come up right to the game time, most likely. Then we have Geno Smith, and it's a little bit of a similar story. He has logged 3 limited practice sessions, and most players, about 65 to 70% of players who do that coming off of a groin strain, would be able to play. Now, if Geno Smith is out there as a quarterback, we would not expect much of a performance hit. However, the re-injury risk is really the concern. 15 to 20% rate of re-injury in our databases. And We'll see if Geno Smith plays. The comments are a little bit dicey, but again, the data does favor it. Then we have Tyreek Hill. So he, of course, missed yesterday's game with a high ankle sprain. The average timeline on these is 2 to 3 weeks. Tyreek is historically, 1, very durable, and 2, very aggressive about return timelines. And even the fact that he was listed as questionable and a game time decision despite not practicing last week suggests that he is going to take the field in week 16. Now, we do normally see a moderate performance hit, about a 15% decrease in the rate of targets for elite wide receivers. But even with that, Tyreek is still far and away a wide receiver 1 if he's active. The other concern here is about a 15% re-injury risk with this injury being this fresh, only 2 weeks removed. So we'll see how Tyreek progresses in practice, but we lean towards him playing as well. Then Jamar Chase. This one will really be told over the practice reports. He was reportedly too sore yesterday to even get his MRI, which of course is not an optimistic report, but most AC joint sprains of the shoulder do not cause wide receivers to miss time. If he's out there in week 16, we would expect about a 10% performance hit is what we see in the elite wide receiver class. Then we have Devon Achane. So he was out there. He's returned off of a toe injury. And then, of course, before that, a knee injury. We do think the toe injury is the reason he only saw limited touches. And I'm expecting that number to increase by week 16. Next up is Chris Olave. So he missed the game. And Chris Olave is dealing with a low ankle sprain. It's relatively uncommon for these to even cause wide receivers to miss games. So we would lean towards Chris Olave being out there week 16. Most of these do not cause much of a performance dip when players do return. There is somewhat of a re-injury risk, but overall not overly concerned about Chris Olave. Next up is CJ Stroud. And this one is a little interesting in the sense that he's got the concussion. Most players, really the vast majority, would return in week 16 here and would do so without any dip from their pre-injury performance baseline. The one question on CJ Stroud is that he did not practice at all last week, and most players would have logged at least one limited session. So you got to watch this one carefully. Again, the data heavily favors him coming back, but we'll have to just keep watching and waiting for the progression. Nico Collins. So he is out. He was out in week 15 dealing with a re-aggravated calf strain. And Nico Collins, unfortunately, the data does favor him missing at least one more week. The average on these is 2 to 4 weeks. And when players rush back, they do so with an elevated re-injury risk. And this is already a re-aggravation. So with Nico, you would expect him to miss at least one more week, probably coming back week 17. Then Jonathan Taylor. Now, the fact that he avoided IR in itself tells us that within 4 weeks was the target time for his return. And add on with that the average timeline on these is 5 weeks. And we do think it's realistic that Jonathan Taylor tries to come back this week. We'll see if he can practice. Obviously, that's kind of the limiting factor going up to the game. But Jonathan Taylor, we would suspect he plays this coming week. Darius Slay just had knee surgery. And although it's arthroscopic, minimally invasive type of surgery, it's very aggressive for this to take less than 2 weeks to return. It's possible, but week 16 would be a pretty heavy outlier. Week 17 is a more realistic target, but if he returns at that time point, we would expect him to be on a little bit of a pitch count. And if he returns week 18, that's where we would expect him to look pretty much like his old self. Then we have Travis Kelce. In yesterday's game, he was reportedly dealing with a stinger, and you could see him holding his elbow pretty limp on the sideline there. The good news here is that stingers do not cause lingering impacts. They are severe, but they are temporary, and they heal on their own within usually a couple of days. And by the following week, players don't see any performance impact in the vast majority of cases. Then we have Jaden Reed, left the game with a toe injury. It's unclear if he didn't come back because of the situation with the score or if that was really purely due to the injury. The worst case scenario here would be a turf toe. And if that's the case, then Jaden Reed is probably looking at a 2 to 3 week absence. But in most cases here, the toe is simply sprained and he would be able to return the following week. So we would lean towards, without a lot of information yet, Jaden Reed logging some limited practice sessions this week and ending up in that 50 to 65% chance of playing. Then we have Kenny Pickett. He had tightrope surgery a couple weeks ago. Kenny Pickett, most likely return date is week 17, according to our data. The tightrope surgery likely cuts off a week or 2 weeks from the high ankle timeline. And so week 16 is a possibility here, but I think week 17 is the more realistic goal. Then Zach Moss, he got injured on Saturday. He had negative x-rays, which is reassuring in the sense that it tells us structurally he was pretty much intact, but he was having difficulty gripping the ball. And that is a common issue when you have an acute injury. The hand and the forearm kind of swells up, and that prevents you from forcefully firing the muscles. So I think Zach Moss has a good chance to play this coming weekend, but we'll see based on the practice reports. Then Will Levis, he got bent over backwards and he looked like his ankle took a severe hit, but he was seen walking around, even walked off of the field onto the sideline. And that is actually a pretty telling sign. With ankle injuries, players who are able to immediately bear weight are usually not dealing with severe ones. So therefore, Will Levis, we would lean towards him being back out there this coming week, but we'll have to follow him along as well. Then we have Christian Watson. The comments suggest that he is intending to return to practice this coming week. Now, if he does that, then the data would slightly favor him playing. But two things to keep in mind. One is that the Packers are a relatively conservative staff. And two is that this is already a re-aggravation. So Christian Watson, with that injury history of having several hamstrings before and then even having one earlier this year, is going to be a high re-injury risk when he does return. So the data, if he does practice in 3 limited sessions, would favor him playing. But anything short of that, we think he's going to be sitting week 16, coming back week 17. Then we have Isaiah Pacheco. This is a little bit of an atypical story. Sounds like they went in and removed a loose body, and whether that's a loose piece of his own tissue or perhaps one of the implants from his original surgery over the off season is hard to know. But in either case, if that's all they really did there, then Isaiah Pacheco returning this week is a realistic goal. We wouldn't expect much of a performance hit when he does return. Then we have Zach Wilson. Looks like a head injury, totally unclear. The Jets, of course, is a little bit of an unclear situation in general. I would lean towards him not playing. Part of that is a gut feeling based on his hesitation going into the past few weeks about playing behind this offensive line. But if Zach Wilson practices, he's probably eligible to play. They did say that he avoided concussion protocol, but there was also some mixed reporting. So keep an eye on this one. Then we have a pair of high ankle injuries, Alexander Mattison and Ramondre Stevenson. Starting with Ramondre Stevenson, he's already missed 2 games, and the third game is missed by most players as well. So the data does favor him being out 1 more week and then returning the following. Now, the caveat to that is that some players really try to hustle back. If they do, if Ramondre Stevenson is out there week 16, we expect about a 20% efficiency dip. And the same is applicable to Alexander Mattison, except he's 1 week behind. So the data heavily favors Alexander Mattison missing this coming week and actually even missing week 17 as well. Then Keenan Allen. So he missed Thursday Night Football with what was reported as a heel injury. Pretty uncommon for heel injuries to be multi-week absences. But the one thing to remember is Keenan Allen is older. This team is certainly going nowhere this year. And as a result, it's really up to the discretion of the player and the team as to how aggressive they want to be about the return. I suspect Keenan Allen will try to play this week, but there is a little higher rate than normal at this time of year of older players missing games on bad teams. Then Josh Jacobs. So he has a quad injury. He didn't practice at all going into Thursday Night Football and then, of course, missed the game. Josh Jacobs is likely playing Week 16, and the reason I say that is because he did try to make this a game time decision this past week, and that was already 3 or 4 days removed from where we are now. So we would lean towards Josh Jacobs being out there Week 16. Then we have Brian Robinson. There was some reporting that they were expecting him back at practice this week, but that, of course, did not happen. Now, Brian Robinson dealing with a hamstring strain, 2 to 3 weeks is the average timeline on these. So he has a good chance for this coming week, but we would expect him, if he's going to play, to log at least 3 limited practice sessions. So Brian Robinson will be having to keep a close eye on that Wednesday practice report. Then we have Keaton Mitchell. So he went down, pretty gruesome looking knee injury, and it really is concerning for an ACL, but also another ligament in the knee. So with Keaton Mitchell, we'll find out a little bit once they get the MRI and know for sure what the injury entails. He will likely have surgery and, of course, miss the rest of this year. But going into next year, depending on if they say this is just ACL or if this is an ACL plus another ligament, that's really what's going to determine his timeline. Just an ACL would make it an average of 9 to 10 months. ACL plus, then you're usually looking at a little longer, usually in the 11-month average range. And that's all we got for now, so I'll kick it back over.
All right, my friend Deepak highlighted a couple of the injuries impacting tonight's game between the Eagles and Seahawks. Jamar Chase, Chris Olave, his beloved Texans, CJ Stroud, Nico Collins. The list goes on and on. Unfortunately, not a great diagnosis like most of us anticipated with Keaton Mitchell, so you hope he gets healthy soon. But always good to get a little bit of that injury perspective to put things in place and know what we're looking at there from Deepak. So keep that in mind as you look to handicap these games, including the game tonight, Payne, between the Eagles and Seahawks, where we've seen this number ping pong all over the place. The Eagles now a 3.5 point consensus favorite on the road against Seattle. Jalen Hurts, you mentioned, traveling separate from the team, sick, but expected to play today. We're not quite sure who will be under center for the Seahawks. So we can go through a variety of different ways. I can lay out cases for and against. I'll give you some numbers here to put things in perspective. When we look at the Eagles, the first team since 1983, when the Cowboys entered 8+ games above 500, lost back-to-back games by 20+ points. No team has ever won the Super Bowl after losing back-to-back games by 15+ points. The Seahawks have been a good team when it comes to ATS expectations, especially in prime time. They have been an under juggernaut as well, going 9-2-1 under the total. The last 12 primetime games going under in 5 straight. A little bit of a different stop unit that Pete Carroll had at his disposal in a lot of those games compared to what we'll see tonight. But we can talk X's and O's until we're blue in the face. This is all about what player may or may not be out there under center for their respective teams. Jalen Hurts trending up. Drew Lock versus Geno Smith. How big a downgrade is Drew Lock compared to Geno Smith, given what we've seen to this point in his career?
It's a good question, but I think you laid it out perfectly in that the way Jalen Hurts is trending is positive, right? We saw like around 4 p.m. Sunday, Hurts chartered a separate plane, kind of distancing himself from the rest of the team to head to Seattle. And just kind of the nature of Jalen Hurts and the way he plays through things would lead me to believe he plays tonight. And we've heard at least, Jay Glazer report on Sunday that it'd be an uphill battle for Geno to play tonight. And you had some of the medical doctors in the fantasies and betting space like Deepak kind of insinuate the same, that would be an uphill battle for Geno to play tonight the last couple of days. So I would envision when this all ultimately unfolds where Jalen is up and it's Drew Lock, we trend closer towards the opener of 4.5 here. I don't know what the downgrade is because Geno hasn't been playing great. Obviously had the spurty spot there where it looked fantastic against Dallas. And I think what we were using was like a 2.5 point downgrade. listen, you look at Drew Lock. I thought he played as well as he possibly could against the 49ers, especially from a clean pocket last week. If you just look at his numbers, he had a 91% adjusted accuracy from a clean pocket against the 49ers defense that has really been trending well. Sounds great. But Seattle can only score 16 points. And Locke ended the game with 4 turnover-worthy plays, 0 big-time throws. And Locke was an abject disaster under pressure. The down-to-down decision-making and efficiency just wasn't there for him, and he used 39% of his dropbacks against the 49ers, great successful. So I don't really know how it's going to look for Seattle's offense with Drew Lock. We're certainly seeing the offensive line continue to regress. Earlier in the year, if you remember, Andy Dickerson was doing a fantastic job getting the most out of like this beaten and battered Seahawks offensive line to the point where like the national media was mentioning an offensive line coach. Gradually, though, like that unit has just been taken on water, and you've seen metrically it decline to a point where now Seattle's offensive line is nearing bottom 10 in the league in both pass block and run block win rates. Abraham Lucas has certainly been back, but it hasn't been positive, right? He's been very poor in his last 2 games. I understand the competition and the defensive ends he's faced while not being 100% have certainly been the cream of the crop. So it's tough to look great in those situations. There are some advantages for the Seahawks receivers, right, against an Eagles defense that struggled to stop the pass, and it's without Darius Slay. If you just look since week 7, the Eagles are 30th in passing success rate allowed, 27th in EPA per pass allowed. The caveat to that, though, is it's just been a murderer's row schedule of offenses that Philly's played. You think about this schedule: 49ers, Miami, Buffalo, Mahomes and the Chiefs, Dallas twice. You are talking offenses 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6th in schedule adjusted efficiency. So this is a monster step down in class against a middling Seahawks offense with its backup quarterback. And you typically also see a 1-game bump when a coaching change is made, which the Eagles have done, right? They've sent Sean Desai not to the sun, but up to the booth.
Still don't know what's going on there. I was going to ask you about that, but you led us in a perfect direction. So the floor is yours to offer up your expert opinion on that particular change in personnel and play calling on the defensive side.
And now you got the pencil eater, Matt Patricia, who's going to be on the field calling the defense. The Eagles front is still pretty ferocious when you look at it in totality. They're 7th in pass rush win rate, 2nd in run stop win rate. I would think the game plan here is pretty simple, right? Take away some of the luck throws, so to speak. I would think you want, to limit the explosiveness because DK Metcalf theoretically has an edge on the outside. That is where the Eagles have been horrific defending outside receivers. I would think, when the dust settles, DK's numbers look pretty solid tonight. But the goal is just to make Drew Lock consistently and methodically move the ball down the field. Eventually, he's going to turn into a pumpkin, make a mistake, especially if he's under pressure. That's got to be Matt Patricia's game plan. To your actual question, though, I just think Philadelphia believes its offense is going to come around. The defense has been shredded, and that has been the case. But again, I outlined the schedule. I don't know if any defenses are going to look great against that schedule of offenses. It looks like the cornerback situation, those 2 guys, again, Darius Slay's down tonight, but those 2, Slay and Bradbury have kind of aged like milk. Blankenship is...
Milk was a bad choice.
Blankenship has certainly, I think, exceeded some expectations, but he's young. You go and get Byard, a little bit of a veteran guy. You're still trying to figure out the linebacker position, so there's a massive void there. Nakobe Dean has not been able to stay healthy. You signed Shaq Leonard, is he fully acclimated? So you're really looking at like one sector of a defense that's still good, and it's the defensive line. And they haven't quite been as dominant as last season, which we expected because they're not playing with the lead as much. So you can't let those pass rushers, right, just untamed go against, just put their heads down and go get the quarterback because they're playing in more run situations. So that's kind of what we've seen unfold. We also, you just go all the way back to the Super Bowl. This defense in Philly, we expected to regress this season, right? Haven't figured out the slot situation. The schedule was going to get much more difficult. The 3 offenses they had played even last season during that great run defensively, kind of torched them. So the least surprising thing ever this season was this Eagles defense downtrending a little bit. Is Drew Lock the guy to to take advantage of that tonight. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, they did open the window on Avonte Maddox. I don't believe he will be up for tonight's game, but something to monitor for the Eagles as they look for reinforcements in the secondary with a schedule that, to your point, lightens up substantially down the stretch as they fought through the gauntlet. They've dealt with the aftermath, and it's a big reason why this team has trailed at halftime in each of the last 6 games, and their plus 21 point differential for the Eagles this season is the 5th worst point differential by a 10-win team through 13 games in NFL history. We'll see if they're able to get things on track against the desperate Seahawks side, who's dealing with a 4-game losing streak in their own right. Pete Carroll has only had one 5-game losing streak as a head coach, and you have to go way, way back to find that last data point that was out there. One last thing, Payne, when we look at the game and the Eagles' offense against the Seahawks defense, have you seen causes for concern with Philadelphia offensively, or much like the defense that struggled when they stepped up in class, you think strength of schedule is the main reason why there's been a wrench thrown in some of their big play potential?
It's a great question. One thing I do want to mention, because it's popping in my head, we had Billy do the last Monday show for us a week ago. And as I was listening to that on my flight, he made a very astute point and said, hey, the Eagles defense is likely to improve the last month of the season, right? This final sector. They've made the change defensively, potentially Avonte Maddox coming back into the slot. But what was good about that is he was like, you know what, take it with a grain of salt. Don't get conned into thinking the defense is fully back, because when they step up in class in the playoffs, their true colors are likely going to return. So I do think we see some defensive improvement the final 4 games here for Philadelphia, but that was kind of in the back of my mind. It was a note that I took as well. And I thought Billy provided a very good nugget there for our listeners. To your question, though, circling back to the Eagles offense, I don't think it's completely broken. It certainly has not looked the same, right? Offensive coordinator, just it's been a downgrade. You see what Steichen's doing with the Colts, right? You see what he's doing with, initially a rookie quarterback in Anthony Richardson, and now, a career backup in Gardner Minshew. And he's just finding ways. So Steichen has been a massive loss. They're not going as fast on offense. We outlined some of the issues that they are having with Jalen Hurts, where he's holding on to the ball a little bit longer than usual. They're not using all parts of the field to throw the ball, very similar to kind of like Hurts' rookie year there, or maybe it was his second year when they went to Tampa Bay in the playoff situation and he wasn't throwing between the hashes. It's kind of returned a little bit. In this spot, I don't know what it's going to look like, right? Is Hurts going to be fatigued? I don't think any of us truly know. Is he going to run as much? I don't know. Seattle's run defense is downtrended recently. If you're paying close attention, that was a defense that we were kind of pointing to a lot in some running back under props earlier this season. But man, they have been dead last in EPA per rush allowed since week 7, and by a long mile. Over 44% of runs have graded successful against Seattle since that time. So maybe Philly, you would think, could turn around, hand it off. But the Eagles' run game isn't really as efficient if Hurts is not much of a factor with his legs, which I think is a question mark. And I think the legs are getting certainly healthier. But the fatigue factor, is he going to be a willing runner in the zone read situations? There's also been massive splits with and without starting guard Cam Jurgens on and off the field this season for Philly, and Jurgens is out tonight with a pec injury. So that's a big loss up front there. So where you're like, hey, we're going to take some off Hurts' plate, we're just going to turn around and hand it off. Like, well, Jurgens isn't there now. The Seahawks secondary, right, despite the names back there, have been an absolute sieve. You got the 5th overall pick, and Devin Witherspoon has not practiced all week with a hip pointer, so I would think he's trending towards out. He's been the best guy in the Seahawks secondary. He's going to be missed. Eagles did get Goddard back to help the throw game in the middle of the field, and something we've talked about in our Dallas Bills breakdown on Thursday was the Eagles offense did move the ball quite well last week. I know you watch the game, you're like, oh, only 6 points. They had 6 trips inside the Cowboys' 34-yard line. They just struggled in the green area with turnovers and being held to field goal. So, Goddard was a welcomed factor back. So my mind says you might actually be buying the Eagles offense a touch low with how it's looked, right, in recent weeks. And then Goddard not being fully factored in now that he's a little bit healthier. And then you have the Hurts sickness. This is a matchup where the Eagles should be able to find relative success offensively. Goddard And Devontae Smith should be able to find some holes in the Seahawks zone defense. We've seen specifically Devontae Smith, his usage really increase against zone coverage. So there's paths to a decent amount of points that puts pressure on Drew Lock to do something here. It has been a steady wave of under money, obviously getting out ahead of the Geno Smith news, Hurts not being 100%. I'm intrigued to see where this total goes, because I do believe even prior to those injuries, there was going to be a thought of under here when it was above the key of 47. So it'll be interesting to see where the total moves. I think in value, Todd, we'll see more movement on the side than maybe the total once Hurts even gets upgraded. It
makes a ton of sense. You've had multiple different entry points on a game like this throughout the course of the week. Had a chance to take the dog at -4. Had a chance to lay a price as low as -$1.30 on the money line a Sunday morning with the favorite. You mentioned the total getting as high as 48. We're now looking at 45. So a variety of different opinions as people try and make heads or tails of the players that will or won't be available for these two teams on Monday Night Football. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast for all things Bet the Board at Bet the Board Pod. Payne, any final words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our loyal listeners before we reconvene for the NFL on Thursday? But we do have a little bit of college football coverage coming in the middle of the week.
Yes, I was going to share that, but since you're the host, you should do that. Let them know.
So we'll get Brad Powers doing all the heavy lifting to talk about some of the, I don't want to degrade them, but I will call them lesser bowl games. In only a way that Brad can, talking about the numbers, where they've opened, where they've moved, some of the player defections and all of that. Folks can expect that Wednesday in their normal time slots, thereabouts. The trio will get back together.
Maybe earlier.
Maybe it's a good point. It could hit earlier, which is even more reason that you should be subscribed on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever your favorite podcast platform is to know the moment a Bet the Board podcast will hit your inbox. And then the three of us will be back talking college football next week with a lot of the marquee games, the college football playoff, updated holiday schedule. No show on Christmas a week from today. So we'll cover that marquee Christmas Day game and the Ravens and 49ers on the Thursday show. I think those are the lion's share of announcements. I feel like there's inevitably stuff I'll miss that I can pass along on Thursday, but by all means, feel free to fill in the gaps.
Yeah, the vibe I got was Brad is going to record a podcast on the college bowl side Tuesday at some point. So I would expect that to be live for Drive Time Wednesday. As you alluded to, we'll be back with the NFL show on the 21st. No Monday pod because that's Christmas. We'll be back with the college football playoff show on the 27th, and then the following day, Thursday, back with the NFL. What would that make that? Week 17 on Thursday the 28th?
Week 17, yep. That would make it week 17 because we're on week 16. Week 15, Monday Night Football now, week 16 on Thursday, and then week 17. Yeah. Time flies when you're having a good time.
And then, unfortunately, no Monday podcast on January 1st because of the holiday.
The holiday calendar.
It's a little bit of a different schedule. But as Todd alluded to, you never have to guess. You can subscribe to us on Amazon Wandry, on Apple, Spotify. You get the notification right to your phone.
Everything right there. No reason to miss a best bet or anything else that comes along with it. So best of luck to all of you, our loyal listeners, with whatever investments you choose to make on the Monday Night Football game between the Eagles and Seahawks, wherever your handicapping takes you, with a couple second-tier bowl games between now and Brad Powers' show release on Wednesday. So wish you the best of luck, and hopefully we will see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wandry, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.